I never thought a simple lakeside dock would lead to one of the most intense legal battles of my life. But that was before I met Barbara Whitmore, the president of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association in northern Minnesota. My name is Kyle Thompson, and I had just bought my dream property on Lake Minnetonka in the spring of 2025. The house was a modest 3-bedroom cabin with cedar siding, but what really sold me on the place was the private dock that came with it. According to the property deed and all the official documents, that dock was exclusively mine. It extended about 40 feet into the pristine waters of the lake, with enough space to moor 2 decent-sized boats. I had always dreamed of owning lakefront property where I could keep my fishing boat and maybe even upgrade to something nicer down the line. The neighborhood itself seemed peaceful enough when I first moved in during early April. Willow Creek Estates was a collection of about 60 homes, most of them occupied by retirees and families who had owned their properties for decades. The HOA fees were reasonable at $200 a quarter, mostly covering snow removal in winter, maintenance of the common areas, and the community pavilion near the entrance. I had reviewed all the covenants and bylaws before purchasing, and everything seemed straightforward. Barbara Whitmore introduced herself on my second day in the house. She was a woman in her late 50s with short blonde hair that looked like it had been styled with a considerable amount of hairspray. She wore a pressed white blouse and khaki pants, and she carried a clipboard like it was a badge of authority. "Welcome to Willow Creek Estates," she said, extending her hand with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "I am Barbara Whitmore, the HOA president. I wanted to stop by and make sure you are familiar with all our community guidelines." I shook her hand and invited her in for coffee, trying to be neighborly. She spent the next hour going over rules I had already read, occasionally adding her own interpretations that seemed to extend well beyond what was written in the actual bylaws. She mentioned approved paint colors, lawn maintenance schedules, and acceptable types of outdoor furniture. When she got to the part about waterfront regulations, I paid closer attention. "Now, about that dock of yours," she said, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "We have very specific rules about watercraft that can be moored overnight. Nothing too large, nothing too loud, and absolutely no jet skis between the hours of 8 p.m. and 9 a.m. "That all sounds fine," I replied. "I have a simple fishing boat, nothing fancy. A 16-foot aluminum boat with a small outboard motor." She nodded approvingly, but then added something that made my stomach tighten. "Also, just so you know, there is a tradition in this community of neighbors sharing dock space when necessary. You know, being good community members and all that." I frowned. "Sharing dock space?" "My deed specifically states that the dock is private property." Barbara waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, I know what the paperwork says, but we are all neighbors here. Sometimes people have guests who need to tie up for a few hours, or someone might need a temporary spot while they are having work done on their own dock. It is just common courtesy." "I appreciate the sentiment," I said carefully, "but if someone wants to use my dock, I would expect them to ask me first. It is my property." Her smile became a bit more fixed. Of course. I am just letting you know how things work around here. We all help each other out." After she left, I felt a vague sense of unease, but I pushed it aside. I spent the next few weeks settling into the house, getting my boat in the water and exploring the lake. Lake Minnetonka was beautiful that time of year, with the trees starting to bud and the water still cool and clear from the winter melt. I would head out early most mornings to fish for walleye and bass, enjoying the solitude and the gentle lap of water against the hull. Everything was fine until the third week of May. I had driven into Minneapolis that morning to handle some business related to my consulting work. I worked remotely as an IT consultant, which was one of the reasons I could afford to live in such a nice location. The commute into the city was about 40 minutes, manageable when I needed to meet clients in person. I left around 8 a.m. and did not expect to be back until late afternoon. When I pulled into my driveway around 4:30 p.m., I immediately noticed something wrong. There was a boat tied to my dock, and it was not my boat. Mine was secured on the other side, rocking gently in its usual spot. But this new boat was considerably larger, a gleaming white 24-foot cabin cruiser with blue trim, and the name Barbara's Bliss painted on the stern in flowing script. I felt my jaw clench as I walked down the sloped lawn to the dock. The cabin cruiser was taking up the entire left side of my dock, its bumpers pressed against the wood. I could see scratches on my dock posts where the boat had rubbed against them. Nobody was on board, but there were signs of recent use, including a cooler on the deck and some fishing rods still set up. I pulled out my phone and took several pictures from different angles, documenting the boat, the name, and its position on my private dock. Then I walked back up to my house and checked to see if anyone had left a note or tried to contact me. Nothing. No message on my door, no text, no call. Someone had just decided my private property was theirs to use. I had a pretty good idea who that someone was. I called the non-emergency number for the Lake Minnetonka Police Department and explained the situation. The dispatcher listened patiently and then told me an officer would be out within the hour to take a report. Officer Mitchell arrived about 50 minutes later, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor and a notepad. I walked him down to the dock and showed him the situation. "That is definitely on your property," he said, checking the property lines on a map he pulled up on his tablet. "Your lot extends to include the entire dock structure. Do you know who owns the boat?" "I have a strong suspicion," I said, pointing to the name on the stern. "The HOA president is named Barbara Whitmore, and she mentioned something about neighbors sharing dock space when she first came by. But nobody asked my permission." Officer Mitchell took photos and wrote down the boat's registration number, which was displayed on the hull. "I will run this and confirm ownership. If it is on your private property without permission, you have the right to have it removed. I can give you the contact information for the marina service that handles towing." "I want to handle this properly," I said. "What are my legal options?" "Well, you can ask the owner to remove it immediately. If they refuse, you can have it towed at their expense. Since it is on private property without permission, they would be responsible for the towing and impound fees." He paused, looking at me seriously. "I would recommend documenting everything and maybe sending a formal written notice before you take action. Covers you legally." I thanked Officer Mitchell and took the business card he offered for a boat towing company called Lakeside Marine Recovery. After he left, I walked back up to my house and sat down at my computer to draft a formal letter. I wanted everything documented, just as the officer had suggested. The letter was straightforward and professional. I addressed it to Barbara Whitmore and stated that her boat was currently moored at my private dock without permission. I cited the property deed and HOA bylaws that confirmed the dock was exclusively mine. I requested that she remove her boat immediately and refrain from using my property without prior written consent. I printed 2 copies, signed them both, and put them in an envelope. Barbara lived 3 houses down from me, in a large 2-story house with a perfectly manicured lawn and flower beds that looked like something from a magazine. I walked over and knocked on her door at around 6 p.m. She answered wearing casual clothes and holding a glass of white wine. "Oh, Kyle, hello. What can I do for you?" Your boat is tied to my dock, I said, keeping my voice level. I need you to move it. Barbara blinked, then gave me that same fixed smile from our first meeting. Oh, that. Yes, I needed somewhere to tie up for a bit. My regular mooring spot is being repaired, and I thought you would not mind since you were not home. I do mind, I said firmly. It is my private property and you did not ask permission. I need you to move it tonight. Her smile faded slightly. Is that really necessary? I will only be using it for a few days, a week at most. I thought we talked about being good neighbors. We talked about asking first, I corrected. You did not ask. I am giving you formal notice to remove your boat from my property. I handed her the envelope. This is a written request. Please move it by tomorrow morning. Barbara took the envelope and her expression hardened. I see. Well, I think you are being unreasonable, but fine. I will have it moved when I get around to it. Tomorrow morning, I repeated. If it is not gone by noon, I will have it towed and impounded. Her eyes widened. You would not dare. It is my legal right. The police have already been here and confirmed it. I turned to leave, then paused. Just move the boat, Barbara. This does not have to be complicated. I walked back to my house, adrenaline pumping through my system. I hated confrontation, but I was not going to let anyone walk all over me, especially not someone who thought their position in the HOA gave them special privileges. The next morning, I woke up early and immediately checked the dock. Barbara's boat was still there. I waited, drinking coffee on my deck and watching the sun climb higher in the sky. By 11:30 a.m., the boat had not moved. I could see it rocking gently in the water, still taking up half my dock. At noon exactly, I called Lakeside Marine Recovery. Lakeside Marine, this is Derek speaking. Hi, Derek. My name is Kyle Thompson. I need a boat towed from my private dock and impounded. I was given your number by Officer Mitchell from the Lake Minnetonka Police. Sure thing. Can you give me the address and a description of the vessel? I provided all the information, including the boat's name and registration number. Derek told me they could have someone out within 2 hours and that the base towing fee was $500, with impound fees of $75 per day starting after the first 24 hours. I authorized the tow and gave him my credit card information to hold on file. We will bill the boat owner directly once we confirm ownership through the registration, Derek explained. You might want to take photos showing that the boat is on your property without permission, just for our records. I assured him I already had plenty of photos and hung up. Then I settled in to wait. The tow truck, which was actually a specialized boat on a trailer pulled by a heavy-duty pickup, arrived at 1:45 p.m. 2 men in Lakeside Marine uniforms began the process of unhitching Barbara's cabin cruiser from my dock. I stood on my deck, watching and taking occasional photos. Barbara must have been watching too, because she came running down from her house about 10 minutes into the operation. "What do you think you are doing?" she shouted, her voice shrill. "That is my boat." One of the marine recovery guys, a tall man with a beard, turned to her calmly. "Madam, we have been authorized by the property owner to remove this vessel. It is on private property without permission." I gave myself permission. I am the HOA president. That does not give you the right to use private property, Barbara, I called down from my deck. I told you to move it by noon. You did not. Her face turned red. This is ridiculous. I will have you brought up on HOA violations. For what? I asked. Following the law, the Marine Recovery Team finished securing the boat and began towing it away. Barbara stood on my lawn, shaking with rage. "You are going to regret this, Kyle Thompson. I promise you that." "I already regret having to deal with this at all," I said. "But you left me no choice." She stormed off, and I watched the truck disappear down the road with her cabin cruiser in tow. I felt a mix of satisfaction and dread. I had stood up for my property rights, but I had also made a powerful enemy in the neighborhood. The next few days were surprisingly quiet. I did not hear anything from Barbara directly, but I noticed some of my neighbors giving me odd looks when I drove past. The Willow Creek Estates community was small enough that gossip traveled fast. I was sure everyone had heard about the boat incident by now. On Friday evening, exactly 5 days after the boat had been impounded, I received a certified letter from the HOA. It was a formal notice of violation, signed by Barbara Whitmore in her capacity as HOA president. According to the letter, I was being cited for failure to maintain community harmony and refusing to cooperate with neighborhood assistance programs. The fine was $1,000, and I was required to attend a hearing before the HOA board the following Wednesday. I read the letter twice, my disbelief growing with each pass. There was no actual violation listed, just vague accusations and made-up charges. I immediately called my real estate attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Greenwood who had handled my property purchase. "This is complete nonsense," Patricia said after I read her the letter. "There is no such thing as a neighborhood assistance program in your HOA bylaws, and failure to maintain community harmony is not an enforceable violation. She is retaliating against you." "What should I do?" I asked. "Attend the hearing, but bring a lawyer. I will go with you. We will make it clear that this is retaliation and that any fines or actions taken will be challenged in court. Also, start documenting everything. Every interaction, every letter, every conversation. If this escalates, you will need a paper trail." I thanked Patricia and hung up, feeling a bit more confident. I spent the rest of the weekend documenting everything that had happened, printing out photos, saving emails, and organizing my timeline of events. The HOA hearing was held at the Community Pavilion, a modest building near the entrance to Willow Creek Estates. When I arrived on Wednesday evening with Patricia, I found about 20 residents already seated, including Barbara and the 4 other members of the HOA board. The setup felt more like a trial than a neighborhood meeting, with the board seated at a long table at the front and rows of chairs for attendees. Barbara called the meeting to order, her voice cold and professional. "We are here tonight to address violations committed by Kyle Thompson regarding his failure to cooperate with community standards and his hostile actions toward a fellow resident." Patricia stood up immediately. "I object to the characterization of this hearing. My client has committed no violations according to the HOA bylaws. This appears to be retaliation for Mr. Thompson exercising his legal property rights." Several residents murmured, and Barbara's face tightened. "Miss Greenwood, this is an HOA hearing, not a courtroom. You do not get to object." "Actually, I do," Patricia said smoothly. HOA hearings are required to follow basic procedural fairness, and that includes allowing accused parties to defend themselves with legal counsel. Now, can you please cite the specific bylaw that my client violated?" Barbara shuffled through her papers, clearly flustered. "Section 12, subsection 4, which states that residents must maintain harmonious relationships with neighbors and contribute to the overall community welfare." Patricia pulled out her own copy of the bylaws. "That section refers to noise complaints and property maintenance, not to personal disputes. Furthermore, it requires a specific complaint from an affected party and evidence of actual harm to the community. Do you have either of those things?" "I am the affected party," Barbara said. "He had my boat impounded." "Your boat was on his private property without permission," Patricia countered. "That is trespassing, not an HOA matter. In fact, it is a criminal matter." My client acted entirely within his rights, and you are now abusing your position as HOA president to retaliate against him." The room had gone completely silent. I could see several residents looking at Barbara with new skepticism. One of the other board members, an older man named George Henderson, cleared his throat. "Barbara, do we actually have grounds for this hearing?" he asked quietly. Barbara's jaw clenched. "Yes, he refused to assist a neighbor in need and acted in a hostile manner." "He refused to let you use his dock without asking," Patricia said. "That is not a violation of anything. Now, unless you can provide actual evidence of an actual bylaw violation, I suggest we end this hearing right now. Otherwise, we will be filing a lawsuit against the HOA for harassment and abuse of authority." Barbara looked like she wanted to argue, but another board member, a woman named Susan Park, spoke up. "I think we should table this matter until we can get more legal guidance. I am not comfortable moving forward with a fine based on what we have here." George nodded in agreement, and after a tense moment, the other two board members also indicated their support. Barbara looked around the table, realizing she was outnumbered. "Fine," she said tersely. "The hearing is tabled, but this is not over." Patricia and I left the pavilion, and I felt the tension draining from my shoulders. "Thank you," I said. "That could have gone badly." "She overplayed her hand," Patricia said. "HOA boards have authority, but they are not above the law." She was clearly retaliating, and the other board members knew it. "Just keep documenting everything. If she tries anything else, we will shut it down." I thought that might be the end of it, but I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I discovered that someone had filed a complaint with the Hennepin County Environmental Services about my dock, claiming it was improperly maintained and posed a hazard to lake wildlife. A county inspector showed up on a Tuesday morning and spent an hour examining my dock, taking measurements and photos. "Everything looks fine to me," the inspector, a tired-looking man named Carl, told me. "Your dock meets all current regulations, and I do not see any environmental hazards." I will note that in my report, but whoever filed this complaint wasted everyone's time. "Can you tell me who filed it?" I asked. Carl shook his head. "Complaints can be filed anonymously, but between you and me, it came through an HOA referral. That usually means someone on the board." I thanked him and called Patricia again as soon as he left. She listened to my explanation and sighed. "This is escalating into harassment. We need to send a formal cease and desist letter to Barbara and the HOA board. If they continue, we will file for a restraining order and possibly sue for damages." Patricia drafted the letter that afternoon, and I had it hand-delivered to Barbara's house by a process server the next morning. The letter was blunt. Any further retaliatory actions would result in immediate legal action, including lawsuits for harassment, abuse of authority, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. For about a month, things were quiet again. I began to think that maybe the cease and desist letter had worked. I went about my business, working from home, fishing in the mornings, and generally enjoying the summer weather. Lake Minnetonka was gorgeous in July, with warm days and cool nights. Then I got a call from Derek at Lakeside Marine Recovery. "Hey Kyle, this is Derek. I wanted to give you a heads up about something. That boat we impounded for you back in May, Barbara's Bliss. The owner still has not paid the impound fees." I frowned. "How much does she owe at this point?" "Well, it has been about 2 months now. With the initial towing fee and the daily impound charges, she is looking at around $5,000 total. We have sent multiple notices, but she has not responded to any of them. At this point, we are going to have to move forward with a lien and possible auction of the vessel to cover the fees." "She really has not paid anything?" I asked, incredulous. "Not a dime. We even offered her a payment plan, but she refused. said she should not have to pay because the boat should never have been towed in the first place. I told her that was between her and you, but she insisted we were in the wrong. What happens now? We will file for a maritime lien, and then, if she still does not pay, we will auction the boat. It is a nice vessel, should easily cover what she owes, but it is a hassle for everyone involved. I thanked Derek for the update and sat back, processing this information. Barbara had let her pride cost her $5,000 and counting. I almost felt bad for her, but then I remembered how she had tried to use my property without asking and then retaliated when I stood up for myself. A week later, I received another notice from the HOA. This time, it was not a violation letter but a special assessment. According to the notice, all residents were being charged a one-time fee of $1,500 to cover emergency legal expenses related to ongoing disputes with residents. The assessment was signed by Barbara and had to be paid within 30 days. I called Patricia immediately. "She cannot do this," Patricia said after I read her the notice. "Special assessments have to be approved by a vote of the entire HOA membership, not just the board, and they have to be for legitimate community expenses, not personal legal disputes. This is another clear case of retaliation." So what do? We file an injunction to block the assessment and we move forward with a lawsuit. She has crossed way too many lines now. We have harassment, abuse of authority, and now what amounts to theft by trying to impose illegal fees. Patricia filed the injunction the next day, and we also filed a formal lawsuit against Barbara Whitmore individually, and the HOA for harassment, retaliation, and abuse of authority. The lawsuit sought damages for the time and money I had spent dealing with her actions, as well as a court order removing her from her position as HOA president. The lawsuit sent shockwaves through Willow Creek Estates. I started getting calls and visits from other residents, some expressing support, others asking me to drop the lawsuit for the sake of community peace. I explained to everyone who asked that I had tried to handle things quietly, but Barbara had left me no choice. George Henderson, the older board member who had questioned Barbara during the first hearing, came by my house one evening. "Kyle, I owe you an apology," he said, looking genuinely distressed. "A lot of us on the board have been uncomfortable with how Barbara has been handling things, but she is very forceful and we went along with it. I should have spoken up sooner." "I appreciate that," I said, "but this has gone too far. She needs to be held accountable." George nodded. "I agree." For what it is worth, I and 2 other board members are going to call for an emergency vote to remove Barbara as president. We have the authority to do that with a majority vote, and I think we finally have the support. "That would help," I said, "but the lawsuit is still moving forward. She has cost me thousands of dollars in legal fees and caused me months of stress." "I understand. I just wanted you to know that not everyone in this community supports what she has been doing." True to his word, George and the other board members called for an emergency meeting 3 days later. I attended with Patricia, and we watched as the board voted 4-1 to remove Barbara as HOA president. Barbara was the only dissenting vote, and she stormed out of the meeting before it was even finished. Susan Park was elected as the new president, and her first act was to formally apologize to me on behalf of the HOA and rescind all the bogus violations and assessments. "We are also going to recommend that the HOA's insurance cover your legal fees," Susan said. "This was clearly a case of board misconduct, and you should not have to pay for defending yourself against it." I thanked her, though I knew the lawsuit would still need to proceed to ensure I was fully compensated. Patricia and I left the meeting feeling cautiously optimistic. The next development came from an unexpected source. I received a call from Officer Mitchell, the same policeman who had taken the initial report about Barbara's boat. "Mr. Thompson, I wanted to give you a heads up. We received a complaint from Lakeside Marine Recovery about Barbara Whitmore. Apparently, she went to their impound lot yesterday and tried to take her boat without paying the fees. When they stopped her, she became aggressive and threatened the staff. They have filed charges for attempted theft and disorderly conduct." I was stunned. She tried to steal her own boat from impound. Essentially, yes. Since she has not paid the fees, she does not have legal right to take the vessel. We are going to be issuing a warrant for her arrest. I thought you should know, given your history with her. "Thank you for letting me know," I said. "This is getting way out of hand." "Agreed. I will keep you updated if anything else develops." I hung up and immediately called Patricia to fill her in. She was not surprised. "People like Barbara often escalate when they feel like they are losing control," she said. "The good news is that this strengthens our case. Her behavior shows a pattern of disregard for the law and other people's property rights." Barbara was arrested 2 days later at her home. The local news picked up the story because it involved an HOA president being charged with attempted theft and disorderly conduct. Willow Creek Estates became the subject of neighborhood gossip and online discussion in local community forums. I stayed out of the public commentary, but I cooperated fully with the police investigation. According to Officer Mitchell, Barbara had gone to the impound lot and demanded her boat back. When the staff explained that she needed to pay the outstanding fees first, she had tried to push past them and board the vessel anyway. Security footage showed her shoving one of the employees and screaming profanities. The staff had called the police, and Barbara had still been at the lot when officers arrived. She was charged with attempted theft, assault, and disorderly conduct. Her bail was set at $10,000, and according to public records, she had to put up her house as collateral to make bail. The lawsuit moved forward through the summer and into early fall. Discovery revealed a disturbing pattern of behavior from Barbara. She had used her position as HOA president to retaliate against at least 3 other residents over the years, imposing fines and violations for personal grudges. None of those cases had gone as far as mine, mostly because the residents had either moved away or simply paid the bogus fines to avoid further trouble. Patricia used all of this in our case, painting a picture of someone who had systematically abused her authority for years. The HOA's insurance company, realizing they were on the hook for Barbara's misconduct, pushed for a settlement. In October, we reached a settlement agreement. The HOA would pay me $50,000 to cover my legal fees, time, and emotional distress. Barbara Whitmore would be permanently banned from serving on the HOA board or holding any position of authority in the community. She would also pay an additional $25,000 out of her own pocket, with payments structured over 3 years. Additionally, the HOA agreed to implement new oversight procedures to prevent future abuse of authority, including requiring board decisions to be approved by majority vote and allowing residents to challenge violations with independent mediation before any fines were imposed. Barbara's criminal case went to trial in November. I was called as a witness to provide background on her behavior and the pattern of harassment. The jury found her guilty of disorderly conduct and assault, though the attempted theft charge was reduced to a misdemeanor. She was sentenced to 1 year of probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered to attend anger management classes. The cabin cruiser, Barbara's Bliss, was eventually auctioned off by Lakeside Marine Recovery to cover the impound fees. According to Derek, it sold for $12,000, which more than covered what she owed. The excess money was supposed to go back to Barbara, but she refused to accept it, apparently out of sheer stubbornness. By December, life in Willow Creek Estates had finally settled into something resembling normalcy. The new HOA board under Susan Park's leadership was competent and fair. They focused on actual community issues like road maintenance and snow removal, rather than trying to micromanage residents' personal lives. I ran into Barbara once in late December at the local grocery store in Wayzata. She was alone, pushing a cart down the cereal aisle. When she saw me, her expression hardened, but she did not say anything. I nodded politely and kept walking. Whatever satisfaction I might have felt at her downfall had long since faded. I just wanted to move on with my life. One afternoon in January 2026, almost 9 months after the whole ordeal had started, I was sitting on my dock with a cup of coffee, watching the ice starting to form at the edges of the lake. My fishing boat was stored for the winter, covered and secured. The dock itself had held up well through everything, and I had plans to reinforce it in the spring. George Henderson walked down from his property, which was adjacent to mine. He had become something of a friend over the past few months, and we occasionally had coffee together. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "Not at all," I said, gesturing to the empty chair beside me. He sat down with a groan, wrapping his jacket tighter against the cold. "You know, I have been thinking about everything that happened this year. It is amazing how one person's inability to respect boundaries caused so much chaos." "It got way out of hand," I agreed. "I never wanted any of that. I just wanted to use my own dock." "I know, and you were right to stand up for yourself." I think a lot of us in this community had gotten used to just going along with Barbara to avoid conflict. You showed us that sometimes conflict is necessary to maintain what is right. I appreciated his words, though part of me still wished I could have handled things differently. "Do you know how she is doing?" I asked. "I mean, I am not looking to gloat or anything, but I am curious." George shrugged. "From what I hear, she is keeping to herself mostly, lost a lot of friends in the neighborhood. Her husband is still around, but I think their relationship has been strained by all of this. She made her choices, though. Nobody forced her to act the way she did." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching a pair of ducks paddle across the open water. The lake was beautiful in winter, peaceful in a way that made all the drama of the past year feel distant. "You still planning to stay?" George asked eventually. "Absolutely," I said. "This is my home. I am not letting anyone drive me away from it," he smiled. "Good. We need more people like you in this neighborhood. People who stand up for what is right, even when it is difficult." As George headed back to his house, and I sat alone on my dock, I reflected on everything that had happened. I had moved to Lake Minnetonka looking for peace and a fresh start. Instead, I had found myself in the middle of a conflict that had tested my resolve and cost me considerable time and money. But I had also learned important lessons. I learned that property rights matter, that bullies will push as far as you let them, and that sometimes standing up for yourself means accepting conflict rather than avoiding it. I learned that communities are only as healthy as the people who lead them, and that accountability is essential. Most importantly, I learned that my dock was mine, and I would never apologize for protecting what was rightfully my property. The settlement money helped offset my legal expenses and gave me some financial breathing room. I used part of it to make improvements to my house and property, including installing better security cameras and motion sensor lighting around my dock. I was not paranoid, but I believed in being prepared. The new HOA board proved to be a dramatic improvement over Barbara's regime. Susan Park ran meetings efficiently and focused on actual community concerns. The board approved a new playground for families with young children, organized a neighborhood cleanup day, and even negotiated a better contract for snow removal that saved everyone money. In February, I attended my first HOA meeting since the lawsuit had been settled. I was nervous about how other residents would react to me, but I was pleasantly surprised. Several people came up to thank me for standing up to Barbara, sharing their own stories of how she had bullied or intimidated them over the years. One woman, an elderly resident named Margaret, actually hugged me. "You did what a lot of us were too scared to do," she said. "Thank you for that." The meeting itself was uneventful, covering routine business like budget approvals and maintenance schedules. It was exactly what an HOA meeting should be, boring and functional. As winter gave way to spring, I began preparing my boat for another season on the lake. I spent a weekend in March cleaning and servicing the outboard motor, checking the hull for any damage, and replacing some worn safety equipment. On the first genuinely warm day in April, I launched the boat and took it out for a test run. The lake was still cold, but the sun was bright and the sky was clear. I motored out to one of my favorite fishing spots, cut the engine, and just drifted for a while. The only sounds were the lap of water against the hull and the distant call of loons. This was why I had bought this property, for these moments of peace and connection with nature. When I returned to my dock that afternoon, I found a note tucked under one of my dock cleats. It was from my neighbor directly to the south, a friendly guy named Paul who I had talked to a few times. The note read, "Hey Kyle, I am having some family visit next weekend and we will have more boats than dock space. Would it be okay if we tied up one boat at your dock for the afternoon? Happy to pay a usage fee if you want. Let me know. Thanks, Paul." I smiled at the note. This was how it should have been from the beginning. A simple request, respectfully made, with recognition that it was my property and my decision. I texted Paul back and told him it was fine, no fee necessary, just let me know what time they would be arriving so I could make sure there was space. That weekend, Paul's family came over with 3 boats in total. They tied up at both docks for a few hours while they had a barbecue at Paul's house. Before they left, Paul came over with a 6-pack of local craft beer as a thank you gift. "Really appreciate you letting us use your space," he said. "Made the day a lot easier for everyone." "No problem," I replied. "Anytime you need it, just ask." That simple exchange represented everything that had been missing from my interaction with Barbara. Respect, communication, and basic human decency. It was not complicated, but apparently it had been too much for her to manage. As spring progressed into summer, I settled into a comfortable routine. Work was going well, and I had picked up several new clients that kept me busy during the week. On weekends, I explored different parts of Lake Minnetonka, discovering hidden coves and excellent fishing spots. I even joined a local fishing club and made some new friends who shared my interest in walleye and bass fishing. The community of Willow Creek Estates continued to improve under the new HOA leadership. Susan Park organized a summer block party in June that drew almost every resident. There was live music, a potluck dinner, and activities for kids. It was the kind of community event that brought people together rather than dividing them. Barbara did not attend, of course. I rarely saw her anymore, and when I did, we both made a point of avoiding each other. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and her husband were considering selling their house and moving to a different area. I did not know if that was true, but I would not have blamed them if they wanted a fresh start somewhere else. In July, I received the final payment from Barbara as part of the settlement agreement. It was strange to think that the whole ordeal was truly over. The legal case was closed, the criminal charges had been resolved, and life had moved on. Sometimes I would look back at how it all started with such a simple thing, my private dock, and marvel at how quickly it had escalated. I never regretted standing up for my property rights, but I did sometimes wonder if there had been a way to de-escalate things earlier. Could I have been more diplomatic with Barbara from the start? Could I have tried harder to find a compromise? Ultimately, I concluded that while I could have done some things differently, the core issue was Barbara's refusal to respect boundaries and her abuse of authority. Those were choices she made, and she had to live with the consequences. One evening in August, I was sitting on my deck when I saw Barbara walking along the shoreline. She was alone, moving slowly and seemed lost in thought. Our eyes met briefly across the distance, and for a moment I thought she might wave or acknowledge me in some way. Instead, she just turned and walked back toward her house. I felt a pang of something, not quite sympathy, but maybe understanding. She had lost a lot through this whole ordeal. Her position, her reputation, her boat, and probably many friendships. I had not set out to destroy her life. I had just wanted to protect my property. But once the wheels were set in motion, everything had snowballed beyond either of our control. George stopped by later that evening with some fresh-caught fish from his own fishing trip. We grilled them on my deck and talked about everything and nothing, the kind of easy conversation that comes with genuine friendship. I saw Barbara walking earlier, I mentioned. She looked sad. George nodded thoughtfully. I think she is dealing with a lot of regret. Her husband told me they are going through counseling, trying to work through everything that happened. He is a good guy, stuck by her through all of this, but it has not been easy. I never wanted to hurt her, I said. I just wanted her to respect my property. I know that. Most people in this neighborhood know that. She brought it on herself through her actions. You just defended yourself. As summer turned to fall, the leaves around Lake Minnetonka transformed into brilliant shades of red, orange, and gold. The air grew crisp, and I found myself spending more time indoors, working on projects and preparing for another Minnesota winter. The HOA held elections in October, and Susan Park was re-elected as president by a wide margin. The board had functioned so well under her leadership that nobody wanted to change things. During her acceptance speech at the annual meeting, she referenced the previous year's troubles without naming names. We learned some hard lessons about accountability and respect, she said. Moving forward, this board is committed to serving the entire community fairly and transparently. We are here to maintain our neighborhood, not to micromanage your lives or play favorites. The room applauded, and I felt a sense of closure. The community had moved past the Barbara era and was building something better. In November, I learned that Barbara and her husband had indeed put their house on the market. According to the listing, they were downsizing and looking for a condo in Minneapolis. Part of me felt relief that I would not have to worry about running into her anymore, but another part felt a strange sadness. This had been her home too, and she was leaving because of choices she had made. The house sold quickly to a young couple with 2 small children. I met them when they came to view the property, and they seemed friendly and excited about joining the community. They had no idea about the history with the previous owner, and I saw no reason to burden them with it. On a cold day in early December, I watched from my window as the moving truck pulled up to Barbara's house. She and her husband supervised the loading, both of them looking tired and older than I remembered. When the truck finally pulled away and they got into their car to follow it, I felt a chapter of my life closing. I never saw Barbara Whitmore again after that day. I heard indirectly that they settled into their new condo and that Barbara had taken up volunteering at a local charity. I hoped she had learned something from everything that had happened and that she was finding peace in her new life. As for me, I spent that winter much as I had spent the previous one, working, reading, and planning for spring. The dock stood solid and secure, weathering the ice and cold. My boat was safely stored, waiting for the return of warm weather. When spring finally arrived in 2027, 2 years after I had first moved to Lake Minnetonka, I felt like I had truly put down roots. The community knew me, not as the guy who sued the HOA president, but as Kyle, the IT consultant who liked to fish and was always willing to lend a hand when neighbors needed help. I launched my boat on the first day of fishing season and headed out onto the lake, just as the sun was rising. The water was glass smooth, reflecting the pink and orange sky. I felt a profound sense of contentment and gratitude. This place, this community, this life I had built, was exactly what I had been searching for when I bought the property. The whole experience with Barbara had taught me valuable lessons about standing up for myself, about the importance of documentation and legal protection, and about how quickly situations can escalate when pride and power get in the way of common sense. But it had also taught me about resilience, about community, and about the importance of doing what is right even when it is difficult. My dock, that simple structure of wood and metal extending into the clear waters of Lake Minnetonka, had become a symbol of all those lessons. It was mine. I had fought for it, protected it, and defended my right to control my own property. And in doing so, I had helped create positive change in my community. As I sat in my boat that morning, rod in hand and the gentle sound of water lapping against the hull, I thought about how far I had come. From that first confrontation with Barbara to the legal battles, the HOA drama, and finally to this moment of peace. It had been a long journey, but I had emerged stronger and more confident. The sun climbed higher, warming my face and glinting off the water. I cast my line and settled in to wait for a bite. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew I could handle them. I had proven that to myself and to my community. My dock stood solid behind me, a testament to the simple principle that had started everything. Respect for property, respect for boundaries, and respect for the basic rights we all deserve. It was not about being difficult or refusing to help neighbors. It was about maintaining the fundamental understanding that asking permission is not an unreasonable expectation, and that no position of authority gives anyone the right to ignore that basic courtesy. The fish started biting around 8 a.m., and I spent a glorious morning pulling in walleye and bass. By the time I headed back to my dock around noon, I had a cooler full of fish and a heart full of satisfaction. This was my life now, peaceful, purposeful, and entirely on my own terms. As I tied up my boat and began cleaning my catch, I noticed the young couple who had bought Barbara's old house walking down to the water with their kids. They waved, and I waved back. The kids were excited, pointing at my fish and asking questions. I spent a few minutes showing them what I had caught and telling them about the best fishing spots on the lake. "Maybe we will get a boat someday," the father said. "This seems like such a great place to raise kids." "It really is," I agreed. "It is a good community. People look out for each other here." And it was true. Without Barbara's toxic influence, Willow Creek Estates had become the kind of neighborhood where people actually helped each other, where the HOA served its proper function without overstepping, and where conflicts were resolved through communication rather than retaliation. That evening, I grilled some of the fish I had caught and invited George and a few other neighbors over for dinner. We sat on my deck, eating fresh walleye and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and pink. The conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from local politics to fishing techniques to plans for the upcoming summer. Nobody mentioned Barbara. Nobody needed to. That chapter was closed and we were all moving forward. As my guests left and I cleaned up, I stood on my dock one last time before heading inside for the night. The water was calm, reflecting the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. My boat rocked gently in its slip, ready for tomorrow's adventures. I thought about that day 2 years ago when I first saw Barbara's cabin cruiser tied to my dock without permission. At the time, it had seemed like such a violation, such a clear overstep of boundaries, and it had been. But it had also been the catalyst for positive change, both in my life and in my community. I had learned to stand up for myself, to navigate complex legal situations, and to maintain my principles even when faced with significant opposition. The community had learned that HOA boards need oversight, that power can be abused, and that sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to hold people accountable for their actions. Barbara had learned, I hoped, that respect is not optional, and that positions of authority come with responsibilities, not just privileges. Whether she had truly internalized those lessons, I would never know. But at least she had faced consequences for her actions, something that did not always happen in cases of HOA abuse. As I locked my door and settled in for the night, I felt a deep sense of peace. My dock was mine. My home was mine. My life was mine. And nobody was going to take any of that away from me without a fight. The story that had started with such conflict and drama had ended with resolution and growth. It was not the peaceful beginning I had hoped for when I moved to Lake Minnetonka, but it had led to a good place. A place where I belonged, where I had friends, and where I could enjoy my lakeside property without interference or harassment. My dock stood solid in the darkness, a silent sentinel marking my little piece of paradise. It had been worth defending, worth fighting for, worth every difficult moment. And as I drifted off to sleep that night, I knew that I would do it all again if I had to, because some principles are worth standing up for, no matter the cost. The next morning, I woke to another beautiful day on Lake Minnetonka. Life went on, peaceful and purposeful, exactly as it should be.